Wake up. The voice came to David as he teetered on the edge of sleep. They're coming, it said. His arm began to itch again. Without looking, he eased his fingers over the crook of it and began to scratch. When no relief came and the urge to dig into his flesh arose, David rubbed his forearm against the rough edge of a dry wall slab. Still, the distinct sensation of tiny, hooked mouths clearing away his flesh increased. He repeated, "Don't look," as he crawled out of his shelter. He would need to walk around, see if the night air didn't take his mind off it, dispel the grubs, quell the voices. He left the alley and emerged into foot traffic. He made his way to the fountain at the center of town square. There, he saw 3 women wearing little more than loincloths and swatches of gold fabric across their chests. In a triangle, they stood mesmerized by the playful stream pouring from Pan's flute. From behind their backs, each woman withdrew 3 fiery batons. They began to juggle them without a sound. David stood transfixed by their grace. He moved closer, and just as he reached one of the women, they began tossing their batons to the left. The sudden change startled David. He jumped back and covered his face. A small boy on the fringe of the crowd laughed. The taunt made David's ears hot. One of the jugglers turned and faced him. She handed him one of her batons. He grabbed it, pulled it closer to his face. His scalp tightened as it puckered into 1,000 tiny bumps. He thought to bring it to his clothes. His hand began to move the baton closer, but before it touched his shirt, the juggler snatched it from him.
"These flames bring life, not destroy it,"
she said, a thick Romanian accent breaking the sentence in odd places. She blew David a small kiss and returned to her sisters. He edged closer, never taking his eyes off the juggling beauty. Her arms pushed and pulled as the rods whirled about. The tallest of the women spoke.
"We will be in Saints Park for 3 nights. Bring the family."
The women formed a line and walked away, flames still dancing above their heads. David followed them through the streets until he was in a large field on the edge of the city park. Several large performance tents huddled in the lot, their fabric torn but crudely stitched together with the aid of various flags. Black trucks, spotted with rust, hummed as their retrofitted generators pulsed life into a web of hanging lights. David continued to tail the women until one curled her finger and told him to join her. He followed her into a tent at the farthest end of the park. It was dark. As his eyes adjusted, a small orb of amber light birthed under its glow a wheelchair with a pale figure half submerged in shadow. The woman's voice came from the blackest part of the tent.
"Joseph, we have a visitor."
The gray body shifted, its spine pulling the torso from the void of night. Climbing one vertebra at a time, Joseph revealed his sickly body. Thin and slick with sweat, he twisted until finally exposing his head, a swollen thing which tapered to a point like a spider's abdomen. Joseph gave a deep, throated hiss, a claim to air, and in a child's voice whispered,
"Are you lost?"
David replied,
"I'm not."
"Why have you followed?"
Joseph shifted in his chair, pulled his fingerless fist into his mouth, sucked.
I followed this woman.
Joseph released a cough.
"Only lost men follow strangers,"
he said. The fire dancer emerged from the gloom, her clothes gone.
Yosef can tell your fortune, stranger,
she said. David felt his skin loosening about him, the world of flesh coming undone. Folding his arms about his chest, he shook.
Helena,
Whispered the man-child.
bring him closer.
The woman pulled David into her arms, her breath warm on his neck. She took his hand into hers and led him closer to Yosef.
Please,
Yosef said.
closer.
David eased forward. When he had grown too close, he began to pull back, but it was too late. Yosef's spindly arms wrapped around his neck, then a toothless mouth sucked upon his eyebrow. David thrashed against the attack, but soon found the air to grow unbearably thin. His mind floated into the soup of dull light, and then all fell dark. David awoke on a bed inside a trailer. The pale sun was high, and he was warm for the first time in weeks. He was bathed and smelled of liniment and peppermint oils. Slipping out of bed, he searched for his clothing. The sun poured through a skylight in a column of white. Dry skin floated through the beam, and suddenly David felt as if he might be under water. Wrapping a sheet around his waist, he shuffled across the room, looking for his clothes. The wall opposite him was made up of locking drawers. He fingered the locks apart and spied the contents of several, finding only sheets. When he turned, he found Elena resting on the bed, her legs crossed, his clothing folded upon her lap.
You slept for a very long time, David.
The blood in his ears grew hot.
What have you done to me?
I've cleaned you, David.
I never told you my name.
Yosef saw your name, David. He saw many things.
Elena stood and handed him his clothes.
We need to talk to you after you are dressed. I will wait for you in my trailer.
How will I find it?
It's the only one with my sisters and me painted on it.
She smiled and left. The last time his clothing smelled fresh was when he'd awakened in his hotel. At that time, his shirt smelled of chemicals. Now they smelled of flowers. His nails were clipped and clean, his wounds treated. The skin on his arms captured the sunlight in a gentle gradient. There was nothing wriggling inside him, no voices calling to him. When David arrived at the proper trailer, he found Elena at a table pouring 2 cups of warm tea.
You look fetching.
She said. Sniffing his cuff, David said.
It smells like flowers.
Frisia, the Africans use it to reduce odor.
You've been to Africa?
I've been many places, David. Please, have a seat.
Elena waved toward an empty chair. David did as she requested and took a sip of the tea.
Your voices have quieted down.
How did you know?
You appear rested. This helps. But the voices aren't your problem. Insomnia is, isn't it?
Yes.
A soldier who cannot sleep is not an asset.
A pink thread of pain ran through David's temple.
Why did you say that?
Yosef saw many things.
The previous night flooded back into David's mind. The fire, the circus, the strange man-child in a rolling chair.
Did he heal me?
Elena blew a silent whistle, a seductive breath, and said,
I'm sorry, David, but there is no cure.
When she saw David's brow lower, she added,
But I believe Yosef discovered information that will aid you with your journey.
He sipped his yarrow tea and signaled for her to continue.
There is a man who looks like you. You and he share dreams. Search for him. He will likely be with a woman with chameleon hair. She sides with a vengeful old man. You must not be seen by the old man or the woman. Do you understand?
Yes, but why?
The snake will eat his tail.
What do you mean?
I do not know. This is what he told me. This is all he knows about that. Please, David, that is not the important part. What you must know is that you have to help This man who looks like you. There is something different about him. Some defect, such as you have, that will make his mission very difficult. You must lead him to the truth so that you both may live."
What?
Again, this was not revealed to Yosef.
She took a drink of her tea and added,
"There is one last thing.
Yes?
There are others who look like you. You must not mistake them."
Elena looked down to her teacup. She took a drink and closed her eyes tightly as if blocking something out.
There is something you're not telling me, isn't there?
She shook her head.
"I cannot tell you. It may change your destiny."
Why did you choose me?
"I didn't. You chose me. Yosef sends us out when we arrive in a city. Whenever someone follows us, we lead him to Yosef. It is his only way to experience the world. He is trapped inside that
She paused as if holding back a sob, and then finished.
twisted prison. He has such a beautiful mind, David."
Before David could ask another question, a half-sized man opened the door and said,
"Man's gotta leave, Lena."
The woman stood and David followed her. She touched his cheek and whispered.
"I'm sorry, but your visions will return very soon."
A weightlifter walked between the two and said,
"You follow me and don't come back."
David agreed. Just before he was out of earshot, Elena called out to him,
"David, I almost forgot to ask. Does the number 23 mean anything to you?"
No.
She blew him a kiss and said,
"Goodbye."